Hello there. This is my project. Get ready. If there is one topic that I love to discuss, it's that of LGBT representation in terms of media. Now, this media can pertain to TV shows, movies, both live action and real life, video games, comics, etc., etc., etc. It can also pertain to any country, though I will mostly be focusing on the United States and Japan.
I find that LGBT representation in any form of media is very important because it's what the general public will watch. The more people see good representation of LGBT characters in media, the more they come to understand the community itself. This representation might be able to answer questions that the confused general public might have, and can also give a closeted LGBT person the knowledge about themselves and the courage to come out to family, friends, and the rest of the world. In this presentation, I hope to explore the different kinds of representation in both the countries of the United States and Japan, from the types of media that I mentioned before. My range of time will be from the 90s to present time.
In the end, I hope to prove two things. One is that the country of Japan is better at showing LGBT represented characters. And two, to argue what the best LGBT represented characters are. And I believe those characters to be...
Let me introduce you to Haruka and Michiru, also known as Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune from the Sailor Moon series. In this final project, I hope to give evidence as to why I believe that Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune are the best forms of representation of the LGBT community in any form of media and in any country.
It must also be good to know that I have not seen every single solitary form of media, so I have not seen every single LGBT related thing. This is mostly just based on observation and, quite frankly, my opinion.
It was around the 1990s when more and more LGBT characters began to appear more to the general public, and that's fantastic. However, there came a problem with this.
For you see, in America, the 90s weren't really good at writing people in the LGBT community.
It's not like they were written as non-existent or the characters weren't proud of their sexuality. Far from it. They would not shut the fuck up about it.
I'm gay!
We're lesbian!
I'm super! Thanks for asking.
Kiss it, spank it.
This means that a lot of the characters were only displayed as stereotypes, gay men being portrayed only as flamboyant men and lesbians being portrayed as butch females.
Now, I will be saying this sentence a lot in this project, and that is that there's nothing wrong with that.
It's just that when these types of LGBT characters are the only ones shown, it becomes annoying for those that aren't completely like that type. The characters are also reduced to one-off characters, guest characters, and almost always the comic relief. These characters were only really defined by their sexuality. They seemed only to exist to play the gay character. That's it. Now, movies, on the other hand, was handling this a lot better. Movies like Boys Don't Cry and The Birdcage are good examples of this.
Now it's time to talk about LGBT representation in American children's TV shows and movies in the 90s. Or should I say, lack thereof.
LGBT characters were in adult animated shows like South Park and The Simpsons, as shown in some of the clips I provided before. However, in children's animation, there were zero forms of representation to be found. Absolutely none. I should mention that there was a good LGBT represented character in the adult animated show Daria. I haven't seen this show though, so I can't say much about it. Now we go across the Pacific Ocean to Japan. From Sailor Moon to Cardcaptor Sakura to the super popular Neon Genesis Evangelion. The good things about these characters, which I'll elaborate more on later, is the fact that they were characters outside of their sexuality. In some cases, like Maya Ibuki and Karu Nagisa from the previously mentioned Neon Genesis Evangelion, the show never 100% directly says these characters' sexuality. It is only discovered by the interactions that these characters have with the other characters.
It's completely subtle and not 100% in your face.
It's also important to note that in terms of society, Japan is usually 20 years behind in acceptance, like in women's rights or LGBT oppression.
Now we switch to current times, that of 2015.
Over the years, with LGBT discrimination in America lessening slowly but surely, there have been more LGBT characters being represented in American shows and movies. In shows like The L Word, Orange is the New Black, Glee, Transparent, Sense8, etc., LGBT characters began to appear more, and storylines in these shows would have the characters go through stories of oppression or their own journey of discovering their own identity. These stories were refreshing and a great way of bringing the troubles of the LGBT community to the general public. However, I once again must bring up a point. While the characters weren't only defined by their sexuality and have more of a personality outside of this, the stories for the characters were about their oppression.
Once again, there was nothing wrong with this.
For me, it's not the best because it sort of says that all LGBT people in the community face oppression, and it kinda still makes the characters all about their sexuality. On the movie side, the same was being done. Milk, Dallas Buyers Club were movies with LGBT representation that were getting Golden Globe and Oscar awards and fame.
My favorite part that I like to discuss about this topic is the recent LGBT representation that we've been getting in children's media.
Characters like Princess Bubblegum and Marceline from Adventure Time, Goober from How to Train Your Dragon, Korra and Asami from The Legend of Korra, and Pearl, Ruby, and Sapphire from Steven Universe have been showing up in mainstream children's entertainment.
Did they hurt you? No, I'm okay. Did they hurt you?
Who cares?
I do.
American cartoons are not allowed to clearly state that these characters are LGBT. At least not completely. Lots of people in society are just not 100% ready to have these types of characters shown to their children. That's why the creators of these shows have to make it super subtle and secret. Hugging, holding hands, and subtle past stories are the only things that are shown.
Now we get to the good stuff.
I will now list off just a few LGBT characters that have appeared in anime over the past 5 to 10 years. Ymir and Krista from Attack on Titan, Kirinosuke from Princess Jellyfish, Ruka from Steins Gate, Lulu from Yuri Kuma Asarai, and Gina and Ginger from Gangsta. Not to mention my favorite TV show, Ouran High School Host Club, features a gender-fluid main character who has a bisexual cross-dresser father.
Let me repeat myself. This show had a gender-fluid character.
Listen, Senpai, I don't really care whether you guys recognize me as a boy or a girl. In my opinion, it's more important for a person to be recognized for who they are rather than for what sex they are.
Where in any form of media, American media, have you seen a gender-fluid character? Think about it. I would briefly like to mention the media of both video games and comics.
In the 90s, when Japanese games would be imported to America, any sign of an LGBT character would be censored. Examples of this are Poison from the Final Fight series and Vivian from Paper Mario The Thousand Year Door. In the turn of the century, LGBT characters in Japanese video games that would come to America would no longer be censored. A good example of this is Erica from Catherine. She's a trans woman in both the Japanese and the English version.
The other guys knew you was Eric back in school. I want my damn V-card back!
Sorry, but once that hole is punched, there's no refund.
Over the past couple of years, LGBT characters have been appearing in video games that are made in America, like The Last of Us or Life is Strange. On the comic side, only over the past 5 years have LGBT characters been appearing in Marvel and DC titles. In Japan, manga, Japanese comics, have featured LGBT characters since like the dawn of time. There are even genres of different manga called yaoi and yuri, translated as gay and lesbian respectively. These genres also exist in anime as well.
Now it's time to bring this all together and make the argument that I've been trying to say this entire time. And that is that Japan is better at showing LGBT-related characters than America.
The LGBT characters in Japan were just characters. Their sexuality was just a part of them, not all that they were. For example, Maya Ibuki's, from Neon Genesis Evangelion, sexuality, which is being a lesbian, is only shown through the way that she interacts with the rest of the characters. You know, like a normal human being. The show and the character is never like,
this character's a lesbian, oh my god, it's a lesbian, oh my god, look, we have a lesbian!
It doesn't do that.
Now, as I mentioned before, things have gotten better through the different kinds of shows and characters that American TV shows and movies have been getting as of late. However, these shows will still shove the fact that they are LGBT in your face, and the characters will go through stories about their sexuality or self-discovery.
Once again, there was nothing wrong with that.
But in Japanese shows, their characters would just be normal characters, normal human beings. Now, I'm not saying that some of these characters don't go through storylines of their sexuality, because they do exist, like Ruka from Steins Gate and Kanji from Persona 4 the Animation, who go through storylines that center around their sexuality and identity. There was also the anime Wandering Sun that I hear also deals with being transgender during puberty.
Right now, try to come up with some LGBT characters in American media that don't have their whole character surrounded by sexuality or go through storylines that are about either their oppression or their self-discovery. Can I pick a one? I'll give one for you.
Can we just skip it? Can you just be kissing me now?
Willow, who is a main character in the show Buffy the Vampire Slayer, came out as lesbian in the show.
I argue bi or pan, but it was the 90s, so I give it a pass.
After this, throughout the rest of the show, the character didn't go for the traits that I mentioned before. She just existed in the regular storylines with her new girlfriend. Another good example is Root and Soft from Persons of Interest. In the end, I think that LGBT characters who are just characters not defined by their sexuality are better forms of representation. This is because they are people like everyone else and not just the gay character, or go through what are now typical gay stories.
They're normal, and that, in my opinion, is the best. Speaking of which...
Michiru, 僕は...
ねえ、手伝って。
やれやれ。
Now we will finally bring this full circle and say why I think that Sailor Uranus and Sailor Neptune are the best forms of LGBT representation in any form of media.
Now, in the original Japanese version of the show, which aired in the mid-90s, the two characters were in a relationship together. However, when the show was dubbed and aired on American televisions in the late 90s, the two characters' relationship were censored to cousins. This took away the LGBT representation in the show and, whether the American dubbers knew it or not, made it become an incestuous relationship instead. Thankfully, the Sailor Moon series has been getting a re-release in America with a new dub, courtesy of Viz Media, that is thankfully making these two characters lesbians again, just like in the original.
The only time that their sexuality is talked about is right here.
一緒よ。え？どこ？かっこいい人はどこ？どこだ？先輩に似てるって人はどこだ？どこです？女の人だよね。
僕が男だって言った覚えはないけど。
The only other time is when their relationship is brought into question.
Oh, not because they're lesbians, but because they go through normal relationship problems.
It's also good to note that Sailor Moon was a show in the 90s. In Japan, in the 90s, in real-life society, as I mentioned before, LGBT people had zero rights and were discriminated against, and that still kind of holds true to this day in that country. In America, in the 90s, in real-life society, LGBT people began achieving their rights and being accepted. The fact that these two characters were 100% in a relationship, and the show told you that they were, in the discriminated country of Japan, I must remind you, is an amazing thing. But it's also interesting to note on how the slowly accepting country of America in the 90s would censor this, while the completely discriminated country of Japan didn't. All of these reasons is why I believe that Japan is better at showing LGBT represented characters due to their liberal media, and that Haruka and Michiru are the best forms of LGBT representation in any media. They help define a generation of LGBT people, and help those of my generation have the courage to come out of the closet.
See ya.
"愛してたと嘆く